Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this Lighthouse session on transition. We're really pleased to welcome you to what we hope will be a productive, engaging, enlightening and enriching event. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping points. We warmly encourage participation throughout the evening. Please feel free to use the chat to share reflections, comments or questions as we go along. We will be monitoring the chat and we'll do our best to bring questions into the discussion at the appropriate points. If you have any communication needs or if you need any assistance in contributing a question or comment, please do contact us. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to participate in the way that works best for them. The plan for this evening is as follows. We will begin with a presentation from our researchers, colleagues, Dr. Jen Ryan and Jenny Fortune from the CP Life Research Centre in Ireland, who will share up-to-date information on research around transition. After their presentation, we will open up to the audience participants for questions. Following that, Bert Martin will kindly host our panel discussion. We are delighted to be joined by Helen Shaw from Loughborough University, Cameron Edwards from Barnet and Southgate College for Special Education, and Paula Martin from Chailey Heritage. Bert will guide the panel through some initial questions, and then we will once again open up for questions from the chat. Thank you for being with us. We're really looking forward to learning together and to hear your questions, insights, and contributions throughout the evening. Thank you very much, Jen and Jenny, for joining us from CP Life Research Centre. I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation on the latest research.
Great, thanks Miriam, and thanks Emma for inviting us here to talk tonight. So I'm Jennifer Ryan, I'm presenting with my colleague Dr. Jenny Fortune. We're both researchers from the CP Life Research Centre in the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. So over the past number of years, we've had the privilege of working alongside a number of young people with CP, parents, families and professionals, really to understand what transition into adulthood looks like, what makes it difficult and what can help. So we're going to share some of what we've learned with you tonight. And during our research, I suppose we set out to look at transition in terms of health services, but once we start asking that question, it's much more than that. So we know transition covers so many areas of life. It's about growing up more generally, becoming independent, navigating opportunities and challenges. So everything we'll talk about tonight, as I said, the focus is mostly on healthcare, but it comes from what young people, parents and professionals told us. The program of research that we conducted was called the Ignition Study, and then from that we developed a transition program called Ignition 2, which Jenny will talk about in a second. But before we get into that, I suppose when we hear the word transition, people often think about just moving into adult healthcare services. So that single event, maybe when you're discharged from children's services or when you enter the adult healthcare system. But we know that for young people and families, transition is not just one single event, it's much bigger than that. And it happens during a period when there's lots of different change happening. So young people are making decisions about their future, thinking about education, employment, friendships, relationships, amongst many other things. But at the same time, teenagers with CP are trying to learn how to manage their own health and navigate a very complicated healthcare system, particularly a very different adult healthcare system. And so for many young people with CP, these changes happen all at once. But we shouldn't view transition as a single event or just one discharge letter. I think the key message is that it's a process and it should start well before children are discharged from children's services. And if the process is done well, it can support confidence, participation and well-being for many years. So we became interested in the topic because we had done quite a bit of research around health outcomes for adults with CP, and we decided we want to dig into health services for adults with CP, but at the same time we thought it's important to look at transition. So we kind of came from two angles, looking at the barriers in terms of adult healthcare services, but also the barriers around transition. So research shows that, as I'm sure all of you know, adults with CP are more likely to experience pain, fatigue, changes in their mobility, falls, and can also experience mental health difficulties. And we know that accessing appropriate healthcare can be very difficult. But preparation does matter, and the goal of transition isn't just getting someone ready to move from children's to adult health services. It's about supporting young people to develop knowledge, confidence, and the networks where they can manage their health and participate fully in adult life. So before we wanted to look into what transition is like currently for children with CP, we looked at what does good transition look like. And in the UK, NICE published a really nice guideline in 2016, a really long document explaining what should happen during transition. Some of the key things I think to highlight are that all of the research says that it should start early, so around age 13, 14. All young people should be given a written transition plan that isn't just put into a drawer but is reviewed regularly. The families are supported to be involved appropriately, so that means asking the young person how they want their parents involved and asking parents how they want to be involved, so getting that balance right. And giving young people the opportunity to meet an adult team before they're discharged from children's services, giving young people a key worker who can guide them through the transition process and answer questions, and also develop confidence and life skills. So this all sounds lovely, and it should be happening. There was a lovely programme of research from the UK that looked at all of these things and found that 3 things in particular were quite important. So involving the family at an appropriate level, so as I said, that's appropriate for young people and for parents, and supporting young people to become more confident in managing their health and given that opportunity to meet an adult healthcare team. These 3 things seem to improve participation, well-being and satisfaction with services. So these 3 things are some of the key things. So one of the first pieces of research we did was in Ireland. We wanted to compare what actually was happening. So we asked young people what their experience of transition was. And in the green, you can see this was what young people told us. So quite poor. So I suppose the best is appropriate parent involvement. Young people felt their parents were involved at the right level. Jenny might discuss that a little bit more. However, only 1/3 of people felt that they'd received enough help to be confident in managing their own health. Only 1/3 had a named worker. Only 13% had been given a written transition plan. 16% had been given the chance to meet an adult team, and 16% had been given life skills training. And when we compare this to UK, so a group from Newcastle did a lovely study a few years before this, where they asked young people with CP, autistic young people and people with diabetes about their experience, and this is what they found for young people with CP in the UK. So again, quite low across all of these things that should be happening, and it was particularly low for people with CP. Right, I'm going to hand over to Jenny now to cover some of our other research.
Thanks so much. So I think, as Jen highlighted, the survey told us what supports young people were getting and what they weren't getting, but we also wanted to talk to them about what transition actually felt like from their perspective. And one of the strongest messages that young people told us was that they felt uncertain. They didn't know what to expect from adult services. They didn't know what to expect, who would support them, and what that would look like, or where to go for help. And several described feelings that they were starting from the bottom all over again. So they felt that they had lost this relationship with trusted professionals that they knew in childhood and often felt dropped from a children's service. Others spoke about having to figure things out on their own. They weren't given the information and preparation that they needed, and they were trying to navigate this new system with very little preparation. And it was clear that transition wasn't just that change of healthcare services. It often felt like they were navigating something unfamiliar with little certainty about what was going to happen next. Next slide, please. So when we listen to young people, it was very clear, as Jen mentioned, that transition isn't just one change. There's lots of different changes happening all at once, which is one of the reasons why it can feel a bit challenging. And there was this big system transition where young people were moving from children's services to an adult team or an adult health professional. There were these power transitions going on where young people were taking more responsibility and having a stronger voice in decisions. There's lots of developmental transitions going on. They were building confidence, they were building skills, they were developing their independence. And broadly, young people were most interested in the social transition. So they were thinking about what comes next. Is it going to be work? Is it going to be university? Are they going to be moving out of home? What are their relationships going to look like? So all of this is happening at once. And it's clear that navigating all these different areas can be quite challenging, and sometimes that can make transition feel a little bit overwhelming for young people. Next slide. Perfect. Another reason why transition can feel challenging is that It wasn't just the number of changes young people were experiencing, it was also that system that was changing during transition. So young people described very clear differences between what children's services look like and what adult services look like for them. In children's services, they felt that the families were often a big part of the involvement, support felt more coordinated, and professionals often had these long-standing relationships where they'd known young people and their families over many years. Adult services felt very different. Young people were expected to take on more responsibility, which often they didn't feel prepared for. The services were more separate and felt less coordinated, and they found that they might often be seeing new professionals and having to explain themselves over and over again. And when they hadn't been prepared for that or given knowledge about their condition, that was quite challenging too. So it wasn't just simply about preparing young people for adulthood, it was helping them to navigate this big change in how support is organised and delivered. And as we explore these experiences further, we realize that transition isn't just about the young person, and we do focus on developing the young person's confidence and independence and skills, and that's very, very important. But also, we need to look at the other things that are influencing transition. And it's not just the young person alone, it's their families, it's the health professionals around them, it's how the health professionals and their families work together, it's how professionals and services work together, and also about how the wider healthcare system, so funding, how services are located, and what is available. These all impact the transition. And what this tells us is that improving transition isn't just about supporting the young person, it's about creating the right supports around them. And I suppose as we listen to young people and families, one idea kept emerging again and again, and this is young people who were describing how they're gradually shifting towards relying on others to taking a greater role in decisions about their health and their life going forward. So we started to describe this journey as moving from passenger to pilot. So in childhood, young people were describing that their parents and health professionals often took the lead and they didn't feel they had as much a voice in their care. They felt that appointments were organised for them, communication happened sort of above their heads. But as they moved towards adulthood, the responsibility gradually started to shift. And I suppose for young people, the aim isn't that everything shifts rapidly overnight. It's a gradual process where they can build the confidence, develop the skills they need, and become more involved in decisions over time. And I suppose one of the most important things that young people told us is that becoming a pilot in their own healthcare journey isn't flying alone. And they still wanted that support from family, friends, and professionals, as any of us would. And they just wanted a greater say in decisions that affected their lives. So we're not talking about independence at all costs. It's about having the confidence and the knowledge and the support they needed to lead their own future. So this metaphor from passenger to pilot just became an easy way for us to describe what young people wanted from transition. So once we kind of understood what the picture looked like of what the challenges of transition were, we then asked young people and parents, okay, well, we know these are the challenges. If you could change transition, if you could make it better, what would you do or what could help? And they told us lots of things, but the answers were very consistent among everyone that we talked to. They wanted more information about adulthood and what adult services look like. They wanted practical tools they could use in everyday life. They really wanted to learn from other young people who had been through the process and talk to them about their experience and how they navigated it. And they talked about having something that was structured and planned rather than something that felt kind of ad hoc and sudden and left to chance. And many spoke about the value of that coordinator, so someone to help them navigate the process and guide them through the system as they move forward. And I suppose this became the foundation for any of the resources that we developed next. Next slide. Perfect. So I'll just highlight some of the resources that young people and families helped us develop. And this included an information booklet. I know the information in that booklet has been adapted and is available on the UP website. We had some transition tools and checklists where young people could assess what their knowledge and skills currently are and areas that they wanted to develop. We created digital stories, which are a really nice resource where we had pairs of young people, one person who had moved to adult services and one person who hadn't, talk about the different challenges and successes that they encountered and how they navigated that process. And I suppose all of these resources were trying to help young people feel better informed and better prepared for adult life. And while these resources were very helpful, sorry, next slide, Jen. They were important first step, but young people also told us they wanted something more structured. So they wanted opportunities to learn together, build confidence by practicing skills and prepare for adult life in a structured way. And that led to the development of the Ignition to Transition program. So this is a 6-week program. It's delivered in a group setting. It's professionally led, and it covers all the topics that young people told us were important, like understanding more about transition and adult services, managing their health, building self-advocacy skills, and preparing for education and employment in the future. And throughout the research, young people told us how valuable it was to meet others. So we wanted to make sure that this was happening in a group scenario where they could meet peers that were having the same experience. So we've had young people that have gone through the program now, and really encouragingly, they've all liked it. And there's a lot of themes coming through from what they tell us about taking part in the program. The first is feeling more confident. They felt more comfortable speaking up in their healthcare appointments, asking questions, and taking part in decisions about their future. The second was connections. That's coming back to meeting other young people like them. Many had never had that experience of meeting peers who were experiencing the same challenges of transition and also had the same kind of life experiences as them. So hearing the stories from other people helped them feel that they weren't alone, but also give them lots of information and inspiration in cases. Young people talked about, hearing someone else in the group was doing one thing, and actually that made them think, well, if they're doing that, I can also do that. So that was really beneficial. And the third was around feeling more prepared. So young people had more knowledge and more information about what the process is going to be, and that made it feel less overwhelming and less scary. So for us, I suppose these findings reinforce something important, that good transition support isn't just information alone. It's about helping young people practically develop the confidence, connect with others, and feel prepared for what comes next. So I suppose I'll just finish with some of the key messages that have come from our research across all the studies. The first is that improving responsibility really isn't one person, one service, or one organisation. It's something that everyone can be working towards. And I suppose for young people, transition is that opportunity to gradually build the confidence and take a more active role in decisions about their health and their future. And that doesn't happen overnight. But there can be lots of small steps along the journey about asking questions, learning about your CP, becoming more confident to speak up about what matters to you. For families, it's often a balance between providing support and encouraging independence. And young people told us as they grow up, that support remains incredibly important, even as they take on more responsibility themselves. For professionals, one of the clearest messages is that this needs to start earlier, and that they need to speak to young people and help them build the knowledge and confidence and skills that they need for adult services, but also to recognise that transition isn't just about moving from child to adult health services. It's much bigger, and talking to young people about their goals and aspirations for the future and supporting them with that is really important too. So I will leave it there, but just say thank you so much for inviting us to talk tonight and share a little bit of the research with you.
Thank you so much, Jen and Jenny. That was absolutely fascinating. And I've heard quite a lot of that stuff over the years. But I have to say, over the last couple of years, but I have to say, I learn something every single time. So I really appreciate that. Can I ask if there's anyone who would like to pose a question? They could start with putting it in the chat. I think that one of the questions that I wanted to ask from that was, how was there, can you talk a little bit about on the Ignition program, how it was received via the parents and via the children or the young people?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I suppose one thing that I didn't mention within the Ignition 2 program is that a key finding from our research was that, we need to bring parents along on the journey too, because the transition process isn't just for young people, it's also for parents. So the young people took part in 6 sessions, but the parents came along, took part in 2 sessions, which focused on information about transition and also information about their changing roles with parents and how they can support young people. So I'd say overall, it was very well received by both, and parents kind of talked about the difference that they saw in young people, but also how it was beneficial for them. That peer support was great for them as well, because they met other parents that are going through the same situation. And yeah, the young people were very positive about the program. And I think, the massive thing that I suppose we didn't see coming out of it was that peer connection. That was the most valuable for people. And we had a young adult who had transitioned come back and talk to people, and that was one of the most powerful sessions for young people. The other thing that they really enjoyed is that we covered a session on mental health, and they felt that this is something that they don't normally get to talk to. So giving that space and that time for them to discuss their emotions in a safe space was really beneficial.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've got one question from Ruth Kent. If you have limited resources, what early steps would you recommend?
Do you want me to take this, Jenny?
Yeah.
Good. I suppose just to highlight, the resources that we developed were based around kind of in a context where there aren't many resources, because particularly in Ireland here, you can't guarantee that you will get regular appointments if you're a young person with CP, or that you'll see the same health professional, over the period of being 12 to 16 or 18, whenever you're discharged, because it varies. So there are some brilliant resources, once developed in the UK, like Ready, Steady, Go, that we think are great, but they rely on having a pathway built where you have regular check-ins, and if you identify knowledge gaps, there's a plan to fill those, whereas our checklists were developed in a way that they can be self-completed. You can direct a young person and a parent to it to start themselves identifying the knowledge gaps, and it links into more information. So on our checklist, for every section, they link to a section on a website where they can find more information, and then we link to things like UP and lots of other resources. So I suppose just directing them to maybe that first checklist around, have you thought about, what might change when you become a teenager and then when you leave children's services? Do you want to add to that, Jenny?
Yeah, I also think it's about, I suppose, being brave to have those conversations. Like young people, I think often the health professionals who spoke to were almost a little bit afraid to have the conversation because they knew that there were limitations on what was going to come next to those young people. But young people were appreciative of conversations being started. So I think even just starting a conversation early and lighting those little fires or planting those seeds that there is going to be changes and maybe the steps that we can take to work towards to help people prepare is important.
Brilliant.
Shall I read, Aaron, shall I read your question out for you? Brilliant. He says, thank you for your talk. Great to meet you. I'm wondering about the methodology. What was your sample size? And have there been similar studies, Aaron, in England? Is that what he's gonna perhaps you can take the first bit and then Aaron will clarify.
So I suppose for our survey, we surveyed 75 young people, and we had 110 health professionals that took part in the survey. And then for the interviews, I'm being put on the spot here, but we had, I think, 27 health professionals who took part in an interview and 21 young people that took part in an interview, and some parents that took part in a joint interview, young people within that. So that was the rough numbers within that. Jen, would you be able to speak to the figures within Culver?
Yeah. So Alan Cover's work is a 5-year programme of research in the UK where he's looking at transition more broadly. And so they included a sample of young people with CP, young people with type 1 diabetes, and young autistic people. So they had about 70 or so young people with CP as well. They asked very similar questions to our survey. And you can see they found kind of similar results. They were slightly younger than our sample. So our sample was 16 to 24 because we wanted to get pre and post transition experiences, whereas Alan Cover's samples focused on pre-transition, which is potentially why some of those numbers were a little bit lower than ours, because we found it was actually just right before they were discharged that they got some of the information. So that kind of bumped our figures up in some places. I suppose what one key thing from that programme of research in the UK was that lots of young people didn't experience these things that they should, but it was lowest for people with CP and highest for people with type 1 diabetes, just because the structure is there more historically. And I suppose what we did was that we did those interviews as Jenny described, whereas the study in the UK didn't interview specifically young people and parents and health professionals, and we found that really valuable because the stats just tell us one thing, whereas the interviews really explained the story behind the stats, and it's very complicated.
And I guess Liz is asking a similar question that I was thinking, as well as thanking you for your excellent work, which I agree with too. The key themes that parents report during the Ignition programme, what were they most concerned about, or what are they talking about?
I suppose when we evaluated the programme, we were mainly looking at kind of the feasibility, acceptability. So we did it along kind of a framework called the theoretical framework of acceptability. And it was, I suppose, mainly finding out whether parents thought it was appropriate. So like, were all the topics covered appropriate, which they did. I think young people were more keen on mental health than the parents. Parents were a little bit more cautious about discussing mental health. So that was something that parents brought up. But just overall, they found the programme acceptable. They felt the topics were relevant. They felt that the programme was appropriate in terms of the language that it used, the examples that it used, that it was all relevant to the young people that, as they were going through the process. And they'd all recommend, they would all have recommended the programme going forward to others. So it wasn't, I suppose it was kind of limited to those constructs. Yeah.
Amazing. And I think the final question for this part of the evening will be, as Anthony said, really interesting programme. Thank you for sharing the research. Wondered if your talks were multidisciplinary, and if so, who spoke at them?
So as I said, like each of the sessions covered a different topic, and some of them may have been more relevant to one health professional than another. So we designed the program that any health professional could implement it. It had like a structured handbook alongside it, so that someone could pick up and see like how everything is implemented and what the topics cover and how to do the exercises with the young people. The different centres that we worked with, they implemented it in different ways. So some of them did divide it down. So like say for the mental health, they had a psychologist that did that session. Other teams just implemented it where they had a group of health professionals. They weren't necessarily discipline specific for each topic, and both seemed to work equally well. So it really kind of just depended on what the staffing was in each organisation, how they chose to implement it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both Jen and Jenny, for sharing that phenomenal research. And someone's just put, it's the first time with someone who's got a 14-year-old, she's heard of the Ready Steady program. So we're all learning tonight. Bert, can I hand over to you for the opening of the panel while I find everyone?
Yeah, of course. I suppose I should introduce myself quickly. My name's Bert, and I'm a member of the advocate team at UP, and I'm 28, and I have sort of successfully, in inverted commas, navigated transition. So we thought to give an authentic voice to this panel that I could sort of chair it and direct some of the questions. So that's why I'm here. Does everyone else want to just quickly introduce themselves so we know who we're talking to?
Helen, I'm getting you up in a second. There we go.
I'm happy to go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron. I'm a physiotherapist who works at a college in North London. I work with a number of students with a broad range of disabilities, from the sort of PMLD population right up to students who are completing traineeships at the college and ultimately looking to leave our college and gain employment. So I've been here in the UK working for 2 years, and Miriam's invited me today just to sort of share my, I guess, personal experiences within the college environment and how that is pertinent to what we're talking about today.
I'll go next.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Paula Martin. I'm an assistant head teacher here at Chailey Heritage School. We're a non-maintained special school for children and young people with complex neurodisabilities. A large number of our students have cerebral palsy. Part of my role involves coordinating the future placement planning and transition to adult services. For the cohort here, many of us have profound and multiple learning disabilities, and I do a lot of work with parents, particularly in the best interests of the young people here.
Okay, I think that leaves me to go. I'm Helen Shaw. I'm from Loughborough University, and so I manage the disability support services on campus. So I'm here to give a perspective from a higher education standpoint.
Okay, lovely. I think that's everyone on the panel. So am I right to kick off with questions, or do we have any? Okay, we can just go. Brilliant. So this is, I guess, I guess if we could start with Cameron. I was interested when I was looking through the planning sort of stages and the conversations that you had with Miriam. What does a sort of well-prepared student, what information does a well-prepared student arrive at your college with regard to sort of the idea of their transition? What sort of the key information that you think they arrive with in cases of successful transition, I suppose?
Yeah, but so I think we try and track down as much information as we can prior to the students starting at the college, and that sort of transition process starts while those students are still in school. So in sort of the third term coming into summer. Often we do try our best, and often we find that the physiotherapy team and often the teaching team can be quite difficult to track down at some of the schools that we work with. So we do rely a lot on the parents to also facilitate with that transition process for the students who might not have a voice themselves. So we definitely do immersion days for some of those students, but um, for the ones that we need to lean on the parents for information, it is always helpful if they are aware of what the students currently are doing at their school, and specifically for my role and for physio, knowing what equipment the student uses, what sort of programs are they doing, how active are they during the day at school, so that we can continue to provide the physiotherapy services at the right level for those students as soon as they come to us at college. What we don't want is that with the new intake of students, we get through initial assessments, and sometimes it does take time to find exactly where that student is at physically and what they are genuinely capable of. So smoothing out that transition process by providing that information to the physiotherapy team, because sometimes you can't rely on the other physios to carry that information across.
Okay, no, that's really useful. If you could, you just give me sort of the top three, whether it's documents or sort of pieces of information. So I know that you're saying, a lot of the coordination now currently has to sit with the families in order for the information to be accurate. But what sort of if we're thinking about people that are preparing for transition now, what are the sort of things that they could come to you, that they could come to you with that would be the most useful?
Yeah, certainly. And I love reports. So getting reports from either the physios at the school or community physios, as these young people will still be under, assuming they'll be under the pediatric services within their local areas. Getting handover reports or transition reports from those physios is often the best way to get that ball rolling. Any sort of documentation that can be provided from that provides health information is fantastic, and I think that if the families are able to get copies of that prepared before they leave the schools, it just saves a lot of work later trying to chase it up once that student is already inside college. So I definitely think reports from either the school physios, college physios, or any other sort of pediatrician or anyone involved in health is the best for what we would like to see.
Right. I mean, and a lot of that, and this is open to the whole panel, please, but a lot of that should be included in theory in an educational healthcare plan, as far as I understand it. So I
Yeah, so
suppose,
I think it.
yeah.
Sorry, Brad. I think it certainly should be. But what we often find is we'll get EHCP healthcare plans that are often quite outdated as well. And what we read in those healthcare plans isn't necessarily reflective of where that student is at. Often there'll be really good goals set at those ages, like we talked about at sort of that 13, 14, where transition might start. But by the time students complete their time at school, we get students ranging from sort of 16 to 23 transitioning into college. Often those healthcare plans can be quite outdated, which is why that sort of involvement from a parent level as well can best reflect what's going on, and making sure the parents read those healthcare plans to keep them as up to date as possible, makes the educational healthcare plan and all of the funding most relevant for those students as they transfer into college. Sorry to cut you off with what you were saying there.
Thank you. Helen, is that sort of representative of your experience as well from a university perspective? And is there anything else that you would add to those key documents that any student looking to enter higher education should try and come with if they've been involved in their own coordination?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a higher education perspective, we are really keen and we want students to come with as much as they can. Partly to avoid, as a few people have mentioned, to that experience of repeating their story more than once. So if there's a report that already talks about how it impacts the student or the young person, what kind of healthcare, that gives us a starting block to work from. I think one of the main differences from listening to what Cameron was saying is that the student needs to come with that proactively and independently themselves. So as an institution, certainly from our point of we've got over close to 4,000 all those health professionals associated with all those students to gather the paperwork. So the more information that students can come with, the better. EHCP education healthcare plans we definitely find helpful if they're in date, obviously, as Cameron said. While the sort of the funding stream isn't replicated in HE, there's certainly again a good starting point to work from to understand the context and the background of that young person's journey, as well as giving other framework to look at higher education support. I'm just having a look because I was making some notes when Cameron was talking. I think again the relationships between professionals is really important. So if you can come with paperwork and contacts and consent and all that kinds of stuff set up so people can talk to each other and host and talk to the university and their advisor or their contact person, again, that's really helpful to kind of get ahead of that as well.
That's really useful. I found in my own personal experience that there was a huge coordination burden placed on me as a student to navigate all of these
Yeah.
different relationships with, with moving from healthcare, education, and, trying to even make sure that your educational healthcare plan was up to date before you left the institution to go to another one was really challenging. Paula, I wondered if I could bring you in because one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you brought up in the planning meeting was about the lack of a consistent point of contact. And I'm wondering, that would have been something that I would have found really helpful when I was going through it. And I was just wondering whether you could sort of speak to us about that and see if that, if there's a opportunity, if when we do have a consistent point of contact, what that looks like and what an appropriate point of contact might be.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think Dr. Jenny and Jen also referred to that this morning. The point of contact I'm talking about is that we've got students here, obviously, and we're talking about supporting students, but we also give a lot of support to parents in this setting. And they're working with a huge amount of people. There's a huge amount of people around each child here. If there can be one person that they check in with, it's going to make navigating that transition journey an awful lot easier. In our setting, it might be that, I fulfill that role. At least it's somebody consistent that the parents can check in with. And what that means is essentially we don't have the problem where there's a social worker who's worked with the child and the family for a long, long time. Maybe, people change, their job roles change, there's new people get involved. Even understanding the titles involved, I think, is quite difficult for people. So certainly if there's a transition coordinator or somebody that they can relate to and always go back to, and that person can signpost them to the other services, that's always going to be helpful.
Okay, and that sort of leads me on to my next question. And this, if all the panel could give me an answer to this, that'd be helpful. Who do we think would be the best placed person, in a typical environment? So, we're going from let's take, a either specialist or mainstream secondary school. Who is the right professional or person in that young person's life who probably should take on as the point of contact? In an ideal world, who do we think that should be? Anyone? Paula?
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, as I say, where possible, it might be the future placement planning coordinator, the transition coordinator in the school or maybe in the college. It might be that person. But essentially, the responsibility, I think, it isn't just one person's responsibility. So the very best thing is for teams to work together effectively.
Yeah.
And I know that's very hard across multiple services.
It is really hard, which is why, I am interested in if there's a sort of, a best practice scenario, then what does that look like in terms of organizations talking to each other? And I was just wondering, Cameron or Helen, what would, from your organization's perspective, what would be, who would be the most useful person and how would you, how would you like that person to be informed, I suppose, in order to get the most out of the transition process? I'm just thinking about young people that are coming through. How can they, we know what the problems are. How can they influence that, and how can they create a circumstance where someone else is perhaps sharing the responsibility with them of coordinating all this stuff? And I'm just wondering, who do you think, in all of your experience, is is the right people or the right services to be leading that charge?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that. So in our experience, it varies. So sometimes a job title in and of itself isn't perhaps the right person. Ultimately, it comes down to who, for us, it comes down to who that student or young person is most confident and trusts the most, and who understands holistically what's happened to them, what is happening to them, and what services are involved with them. So I think from a university perspective, we would be very much led by the student as to who they wanted us to liaise with. And we would assume then that that person has been nominated, chosen, the consent has been set up for us to talk to that person, that they are in a position to look holistically and understand that student's journey so far. And the student is confident working and communicating with them as well.
And is that
Yeah,
consistent with your experience as well, Cam?
Yeah, in my role, I'm not necessarily involved at all in making any of the decisions about the students transitioning either in or out of the college. But what we do as a healthcare team at our college is making sure that we are equipping that student with everything that they need to then move on to their next setting, whether that be another educational setting or into the community. So we know that as soon as you come into adult services, I guess that level of healthcare from definitely the NHS starts to fall away a lot. And so
Box
we make sure
completing.
we are equipping those students with the right information, and for any external healthcare provider or for the student themselves or for the families, we give them an up-to-date sort of snapshot of where that student is at and recommendations moving forward, so that nothing is sort of left up to chance as they transition out of our college.
And how does the panel think we could sort of best be empowering young people without simply transferring responsibility from services to individuals? I'm just, is there something that that you guys have seen in elements of best practice, or anything that you sort of think it would empower young people to be able to actually navigate that process as seamlessly as possible? And that's for anyone who wants to answer that question first. Paula, you look very keen.
I'm interested in that. I think in school it's a question of listening to them, keeping the young person at the heart of the very heart of the process, and making sure they're listened to. Now, for our students, that will mean working with their communication systems, and that in itself is complex. But making sure that the right people are around them to do that, and that they have a seat at the table wherever possible is incredibly important. So we would encourage our young people to be asking questions. We would want them to be taking it on themselves to seek as much information as possible. We'll help them find that information. And similarly, we work closely with parents, if they're acting on their behalf.
Right. And I suppose, Paula, I'm going to follow up with you because that's actually very, very interesting. If you could sort of change one aspect of how schools handed over to adult services, what would that look like? And what information do you think's obviously available but currently being lost?
If I could change one aspect, it would be that the services at that time, and as we've already talked about today, transition it's a journey, it's a process, it can take years. I would like to see the services working together effectively. We can set up systems for them to do that, but the services need to work together, keeping to time, keeping the momentum going, keeping the young person at the heart of things, and sharing that information and acting on it. So that was it. It would be effective joint working. If I had to pick one thing, that's the most important thing in my experience.
And from a much earlier stage, if we look at the research from earlier, And Helen, I wondered whether you could comment on this, from we need to that coordination and stuff needs to start much, much earlier. I mean, that was definitely something that was a takeaway from my experience.
Mm.
And sort of, what information is often missing from transitions for you, Helen, and what information would or support would actually enable for the most successful transitions in your view?
Yeah, so the most successful students who have transitioned to higher education are those who have made contact with us early, 6 months or more, and they've been responsive to meetings, appointments, emails, those kinds of things, and they've got the right people around them to be able to respond to the queries that we have. We've had some students who have not shared with us of the impact that their cerebral palsy has had on them or is having on them until just a few weeks before term has started, and they're looking to live on campus as well. And some of
Hmm.
that comes back to some of the topics that have been talked about before in terms of the expectations of being in an environment where everybody knows them. Everybody already has a structure where systems are in place for sharing information, and services already have that relationship. And so there's almost an expectation that that will continue into higher education. So it's a huge shock, or it can be a huge shock when the student arrives at university and doesn't find that to be the case, and that's when the transition has been incredibly challenging. So I think managing student or applicant expectations is key, and the key thing is to if you are for us the key thing is even if you're thinking that Loughborough might be the place for you, whether you haven't decided it is or not, whether you've not started exploring courses, is to get in touch early, to have conversations about what experience do you have with working with students with cerebral palsy? What kind of policies do you have for disabled student applications? Can we come and visit and look around the actual spaces and campus? So we're on an incline. Our campus is on an incline. So unless you come and visit the campus, you don't know that until you get here. So there's a lot of expectation management that starts early, which would be really helpful. And coming with information about your support network, your professionals, and like I said before, having the consent to have those open conversations is really helpful. That proves to be a much more positive transition experience into HE, in our experience anyway.
And Cameron, does that change, if we're moving, because there's a more systems-based pathway if you're going into higher education, um, because there's more crossover. But that might not be the case for a lot of people. They might be choosing to try and transition into work, so or into other environments. So I was just wondering, could you sort of pick up from where Helen left off, but take us more down a non-educational track?
Yeah, well, my experience, Bert, is largely just within education. So I think I've only sort of got my little snapshot within the college. I know a lot of the students that we have that are transitioning out into work are going into forms of sort of apprenticeships or traineeships as well. So while they're transitioning out of a sort of an educational institution, they're moving into some other form of sort of training and learning sort of area. I think that the sort of I can't speak too much about the experience outside of my sort of educational center. Sorry.
No, that's very useful. Thank you. Okay. So I was thinking, we've been talking a lot about sort of what information is important, and there's a lot of accountability on the student to provide all of that information, and again sort of manage that process. And I'm sort of sat here thinking, well, that's all well and good if the student's in a position to do that and has the experience of managing, the various vistas that exist between healthcare, education, and whatever their plan is next. Um, but where do you guys as a panel feel that accountability for this transition ideally should sit, and given that we're not in a perfect world, what can students who are looking to transition, beyond sort of, I know we've said we want to make sure that they've got the most appropriate team, and that often comes from parents, but sort of what do you think the students can do to prepare, the people that are around them to support them best, I suppose. And if we can go around the entire panel with that, if we can start with Cameron, if you're ready.
Yeah, I think in terms of putting a good team around each student, we work with a number of families who English is not their first language as well. So, external to what we're doing at college from a transition standpoint, we're working in with social work as well, and translators, people who are trying to sort of get that message across to the families. As Paula was saying before, I think having the students' priorities at the center of everything should be the overarching guiding principle, moving towards what they want to do, what they're looking to achieve moving forward, whether that is work or whether that is moving into a different educational pathway or none of that altogether. I think that we as professionals as well need to sometimes be the best advocates for those students as well, for the students and the families who um, don't necessarily know what's out there in terms of future options.
Yeah, no, that's a really comprehensive and helpful answer. Paula, is there sort of anything would you take that in a different direction or?
No, apart from, given the complexity of the needs of the students that we're working with here, all of the work we do really is with parents and families, with parents and carers. And, as you say, really, whether it's the family or whether it's the individual, they vary enormously in their readiness to think. We talked a lot about how thinking about transitions should start early. And according to the Sen Code of Practice, it should indeed start. We start discussions around this in year 9 when the student's only 14. But families vary so much in their readiness to think about this. And so all I can suggest is that the professionals around them really just need to be very sensitive as to how they approach things with the family and with the young person. What talking about what feels right at the time at the pace they want to go at. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just what's in my mind in relation to what we've been talking about.
No, I think that is useful. Helen?
Our work is with parents largely around this, yeah.
Sorry, but I lost the line just slightly in the middle of the question. Do you mind repeating the question for me again? Sorry.
Yeah, it was just sort of around. We've spoken a lot about sort of the coordination burden on the students, and it was just sort of around like, what do you've obviously seen both. I assume you've seen successful transitions and transitions that perhaps didn't work as well, and it was more sort of what what do you think, what can the young person or student do in practical terms to facilitate, assuming that they've had reasonable support from the school, who other than them is the best person in your experience to advocate for them, and how should they go, if they're trying to get into particularly your university, how should they go about managing that process?
So we would be wanting them to have we would be wanting the people working around them to be supporting in terms of managing expectations of that student. So like I said before about the different people's roles and understanding those particular roles in the journey from wherever they've come from into higher education. I think having exposure to as much information as possible, opportunities to talk to other people in similar situations is really important. And so to make the most of opportunities that are out there, like all the great transition programs that have already been presented and shared. For us, it's about the more informed that the applicant can come to us with in terms of self-awareness, the more in terms of themselves, the impact that the diagnosis has on them, and the support that they've got around them, the smoother and the more efficient and the more productive conversations we can have to get that transition moving quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, from my perspective, it's just that we need, there's a lot of talk around how the sort of practical difficulties of it all, and actually there needs to be a realistic conversation around, how ready a student can be without sort of the information coming as early as possible. So I think, one of the takeaways from listening to this conversation is that as soon as you can start accessing information around the expectations of different organizations that you might be interacting with, sort of start that process in your own, off your own back in your own right as early as possible. This feels like a good time because there's so many questions in the chat. This feels like quite a good time to sort of open it up and see if the audience want to take it in a different direction.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thanks, Bert. Aaron, if you want to type your question in, I'm going to go to Emma first.
Hi, I'm going to ask this question to the panel. As someone who has lived with CP and gone through university, but also someone who receives lots of calls from both people wanting to transition and their families, and also as a mum of a child that is about to go off to university. So we're at that stage now. And I was just interested in the conversation really around the expectations of the individual. Helen, you spoke about if the individual wants to engage and come and visit the university and all of those things. And I just wanted to open up the question wider, really, that teenagers of anybody who's a teenager is going through that transition process emotionally. Those friends' children, my children who don't have any additional difficulties are finding that a particularly stressful time. And to get my son to go and visit any university was difficult in its own right. And then we are expecting something over and above from somebody who's going into an environment that's really challenging. And also the times that I've heard that universities are broken down might not necessarily be because of the academics or because of physio or the health, but simply that the accommodation wasn't suitable, or that they weren't being able to get out enough to meet other people, and those kind of other kind of barriers. And I just wondered if you could talk to that in terms of, yes, we do have an onus of the individual to come and engage, but how can we support that? It's probably a long question, so I've wrapped everything up in one, as I always do, so sorry.
Okay, someone take the answer. I'm gonna go with Helen first, if that's all right, and then we'll work our way around.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes it can be very practical things that just aren't set up properly, or as they should be. So that, for me, that links back to making contact from a university perspective really early, because there's only a finite number of rooms, for example, on a campus, at a campus university. So Loughborough is a campus university. If all those rooms are already allocated if all those accessible rooms that meet the students' needs are already allocated to students, then you've got an issue of, well, actually, is there space for that student to come and live that academic year? Or do we need to look at adapting a different bedroom? Or do we need to look at potential deferral? Or actually, is that institution right for that student because of that? So there's lots of questions around accommodation, and accommodation is pivotal. That has made or break some students' experiences because of the socialization aspect of it, the accessibility during Freshers Week, buses that are provided for trips that don't have wheelchair access, for example, or there's no room on the bus for somebody to accompany somebody. Really practical things like that are really important, which goes back to, I think there were a few comments about having a key person. So at Loughborough, we have a team of disability advisors, each with their own specialism. And so there's at least 2 advisors who are specialists in physical long-term health diagnoses, and then we have specialist mental health and wellbeing teams as well. So there's always a team that can make sure there's no single point of failure, basically. So if that person is off or that person isn't able to see a particular student, then there's other people that can pick that support up. So it's kind of like for us, those advisor positions are ones that oversee everything. So sort of like coordinating and putting the right people in touch with each other. And without that, again, that's where sort of the gaps start to come out, that the links start to fall apart slightly. But it is definitely the practical thing, like I said, campus, how accessible is the actual building that they're going to be taught in? And what does accessibility mean? Clarifying language is really important. So accessibility for one person pictures up something, and then for a different person it pictures up something else. So to be really explicit about what is meant, I would say, is really important as well.
And can I just ask one really practical question? Given that your student's probably over 18, and the communication, obviously we don't want to overstep as parents and getting involved because we're supposed to be graduating into being adults, but going back to this journey between passenger to pilot, what leeway is there for somebody to be there to advocate on somebody's behalf?
Yeah, is that for me again? Sorry, before I jump in.
Yeah, probably. I mean, just because that's often what I hear.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So that going from that age bracket from young person to adult means that as an institution, we need explicit consent to share and discuss that young person with whoever that might be. We would always be led by the student on that, so that the student, as we've rightly identified, is at the heart of this. So if the student wants to involve their parent, their carer, their support worker in those discussions, from our point of view, they are very, very welcome to. And sometimes that can really add value in that co-pilot stage, as was mentioned earlier. We have seen scenarios where that person has been perhaps more proactive than the young person might want. So that's kind of a situation that we would navigate and observe. But certainly the nominated contact, the trusted person, that whatever comes back to language, whatever language you use to identify that person, so long as the consent is there and it's clear what that consent is for. So I'm happy for you to talk about anything and everything, or I'm happy for you to talk about this, but I don't want you to talk about that with them. So long as that's really clear, then that mitigates against that, because very often people that come along are full of knowledge and information that the young person either hasn't thought about, or just because there's so much going on that they can't possibly remember everything in the moment. Does that help?
I think that clarifies it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
You're
welcome. I'd like to just pick up a question from the chat from Tony Richardson, because I suppose there's one avenue that we haven't really explored. And Tony says, can I ask how young people should be supported outside of an educational work setting? I'm thinking in support of an adult coping with CP that had to be withdrawn from the college at 17 and has virtually no professional support or advice. Now, I know they've said about the 17-year-old, which changes it, but I suppose it would be really useful, maybe, Paula, for you to answer at either side of the age of 18, what avenues people would need to be considering going down for support.
For support, well, at 18, I mean, based on my experience here, that's when the support changes. So in terms of, support is going to come post 18 from either through social care or through healthcare. There would also be some support via education if the young person's going on into an educational setting. But now, some of our students will qualify for NHS continuing health care. So they would be supported then at that point going forward into adult life by hopefully an NHS continuing healthcare lead. They would kind of take the place of a social worker in a way because they'd no longer be supported through social care. Otherwise, we have young people who go on to be supported by social workers and social care teams into adulthood. Or sometimes, just to make it a bit more complicated, sometimes that happens in combination.
And just extending on from that conversation, just to take it slightly into the real world, can you clarify if that is a very clear path across the country or not?
Well, we work with quite a few local authorities, even just from this setting, and we're in Sussex, so we work with a lot of local authorities, kind of, in this part of the southeast. And again, it varies enormously. I mean, we've talked today about the importance of a single person to contact, all those things. Well, sometimes in adult life, it's a question of, the contact number the person has is for a duty team. So they don't have that named person to go to. Health-wise, if the person doesn't qualify for continuing healthcare, and a lot of people don't, then for healthcare it's GP. So no, it's very far from ideal. There are other organisations that exist. There are advocacy services and all those things. If the person's got capacity and the resources to access those.
And sorry,
That's
just
really
quickly, what
helpful.
does that look like, Paula? Sorry, Miriam. The advocacy services you were talking about, can you give us a steer on what that might look like?
We sometimes have young people here, even in school, going through transition whose family have enlisted the services of an independent advocate, somebody who ostensibly sits outside all of the funding streams, but can be present at all the meetings, can liaise with family, liaise with school, and be there to communicate for the young person's best interest. So sometimes that's useful, sometimes not so much.
Oh, thank you. Before I ask Aaron's question, someone also has got a question about the EHCP and how often that gets updated, because I'm understanding that it can lead up to 25, but obviously, if it starts at when they're quite young, how often, and there's a review at 18 when they transition, how often does that normally get updated?
Is that for me? There's an annual.
Anyone who wants to contribute with knowledge and information?
There's in school there's an annual review. Okay, every year there's a meeting to look at the EHCP, but there are also at certain points where it's looked at more closely in terms of phase transfer. But EHCP is reviewed annually, and that meeting is kind of the key meeting in a year, and it provides the forum to start discussions around transition as well.
And is that the same, Helen and Cam, when you're over 18?
I would say yes. We still do our reviews annually as well. And as I was saying before, sometimes we find that as the needs of the students are always changing as the nature is with their disabilities. Sometimes the information that we receive in the care plans coming out of school isn't necessarily the most accurate. So we always make sure we're reviewing them annually and targeting different goals and outcomes on those care plans to make sure it's relevant to what the student wants to achieve moving forward.
So from a university perspective, the EHCP has a slightly different status. So as a university, we don't look at updating, renewing, or doing anything with an EHCP plan, because by that point we've made our own support plan, and that's what we're using either alongside their existing EHCP, or we've done one that's kind of overtaken that one. So as a document, that sort of ends when it comes to us, so it's useful to read, but it's not something that as a document we would update or refresh.
Okay, so there's another interesting question, which it's actually from Aaron as well, who asked a question in the first half, and it's for Paula and Helen. For people who leave school or college with a low-level qualification, how can higher education become a more accessible gateway for them? In his own experience, he's 23 and just finished first year of undergraduate studies. It's been a long journey. It's helped me grow both academically and professionally, personally. However, for many people who leave school with low qualifications, colleges and universities often do not give them the opportunity to prove to give them the support they need to achieve access at a later stage.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that one. So I think that's an excellent question, an excellent point to raise. So from a Loughborough perspective, we look at the context of an application, and we have a policy that's called a contextual admissions policy, which is online for students in the admissions section. And essentially what that's doing is the university is making a commitment to look at the context in which those grades were achieved. So if you have been through the care system, if you've got care experience, or if something has happened in your life, whether it's health related or personal circumstances, which has impacted the grades that you've got, the university is committing to look at all of that holistically, and crucially adjust the offer accordingly if they're satisfied that the academic ability is there but has been impacted by something beyond your control. It's not compulsory for universities to have that policy, but it is something that Loughborough does have, and I know that others have it, but it's not consistent across all universities. So if you're looking at choosing a university, that would be a great starting point to look online or to call and ask what kind of contextual policy or contextual judgment is made on an application, to look at the holistic circumstances around that application. So when you're making an application, if a university has that policy, the more information you can put in that application, the better. So when admissions are looking at it, they can see, oh, okay, so the grades weren't perhaps achieved for entry, but if they can see the context around that, they can then make an informed choice about what adjustments, if any, can be made for that offer. So it's really important to share that if you feel comfortable doing that.
Amazing.
And I guess, Pam, I just wanted to ask, to follow up, from university, from college, where are the sorts of places that people transition into after college, and what are you setting people up for? And what's your experience about the success of that? Because obviously 18 is not the only transition point, but that people are going to transition out of college and out of university, and reading the chat, we know that we're working in an imperfect world. So I just wondered from your experience where people go and how that works.
Yeah, Emma, and I think once again, I'm not definitely the best person to say where everyone's going, because I'm just doing the physio side of things. But a lot of our students, as I said, will, depending on their age as well. So some will transition into potentially a different college or educational setting. So our college, generally students can stay up to 3 years. And if they've transitioned straight out of school at sort of the age of 17, 18, they can be with us for 3 years and then potentially transition into another college as well. Some of the higher level students move into traineeships and sort of apprenticeships under certain programs and provisions that the transition sort of advisor we have at college can help set them up with. And some of those programs are started while they're in college as well. So students will miss 1 day a week to start, immersing themselves into those programs. For some of the, I guess, PMLD students and the students who are not looking to move into work or education, some of those students go to local sort of day centres that are run by the boroughs, and that's where a lot of our information is quite important, because some of their sort of necessary equipment and programs and things like that needs to go with those students, so that in those day centres the staff are aware of what they need to be doing to sort of maintain their level of function and promote their sort of best health and well-being. So I think that's sort of my 2 cents of the different streams that a lot of people go into.
We're not going to hold you up as as knowing everything. It's just from your experience, and yes, to like has been said in the chat, from several of the conversations, we're not working in a perfect world, and we are trying to improve those pathways, but we do recognise that they don't exist as we'd like them to be. So it's just interesting to find out how we navigate it right now whilst still working for improvements. So thank you.
I think that just leaves me to say thank you so much to the panel. It has been a fascinating conversation, which could go on for a lot longer. There are more queries and thoughts that have come through. And just to say a very massive thank you to everybody who has contributed this evening. And I'm just going to wanted to share with you another couple of pieces of information. I realize I'm not as good at multitasking as I thought I was, so just bear with me. We are having, we're lucky enough to be able to open up some of the course that, bear with me, Paula, you won't be on the spotlight for too much longer once I've found you. There we go. Everyone's in the room together. We are going to be opening up our own transition program in the autumn. So I'm going to share with you, once you can see it on the group here. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
So thank you again for joining us this evening. And there's a QR code on the screen, and I'll add the email, the link in the chat now about our course that we're going to be launching in the autumn. If you're interested in the areas that you're working in, to find out more, please fill out the form for expression of interest. In addition,
can I just add to that?
Absolutely.
So just to so we have Jen and Jenny have kindly offered up the opportunity to run I guess feasibility of their program as an online program. And we're really grateful to the National Lottery to give us funding to do that. We are proposing to run 2 courses, and our thinking at the moment is that one of those courses we would open up for anybody who has a child who they think would really benefit from learning the sorts of things that Jen and Jenny were talking about. And the other way that we might consider running it is if there was a transition service that we're thinking about, or an adult service that had lots of young people joining them, that were looking for ways of supporting those people, that we could work in collaboration with a current service that's set up. So either if you're a parent or a friend or a person themselves that are interested in that, please fill in our expression of interest form. And again, if you're a service provider that would be interested in talking to us about the programme, please also it's just a way of us collecting information about people who we might want to come back and talk to. We're not running it as a research study, but we will use the information to think about what the best way to support young people, or the best way that UP can be involved in supporting young people. We know things are not always what we want them to be, so we're just trying to find ways to help that process. Sorry, Mel.
Oh, no, it's fine. Thank you for expanding on it. And then just to let people know that we have a Lighthouse session in September on addressing mental health across the lifespan in cerebral palsy, which we will have the pleasure of having Jen back from the CP Life Research Centre, as well as some other people who have done some phenomenal, fascinating research in this area, which we feel is really important for us to keep ourselves updated and enlightened and empowered about the new knowledge that's out there. We also, for those that are new to UP, run a virtual community centre online. And if you want to go to our website, then you're more than welcome to have a look at all. We run a book club, Art for Wellbeing, Mindfulness, and we have a few more sessions coming in the next couple of months, including some legal surgeries. So it leaves me to say a big thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. We will be sending you an email tomorrow as well with that evaluation and just some feedback so that we can continue making the Lighthouse sessions as informative and interactive for the whole community, which means researchers, medics, lived experience, families, allies, anyone involved. And I do apologise, the little glitch at the beginning of the evening.